One crisp autumn morning, Sarah was walking through the park, the leaves crunching beneath her feet. She had just left the bakery where she'd berated the clerk for being too slow. Her usual scowl was etched on her face as she briskly walked, eager to get home and avoid the annoying chatter of people she found so bothersome. As she cut through the park, she spotted an old man sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. His clothes were shabby and his frail hands trembled as he tossed crumbs to the birds. Sarah wrinkled her nose at the sight and without a second thought marched over to him. "Do you know how disgusting those birds are?" she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're making a mess for everyone else. Can't you find something better to do than sitting here feeding these filthy pests?" The old man looked up at her with soft, tired eyes. He gave her a gentle smile, the kind that could melt even the coldest of hearts, though Sarah remained unaffected. "I'm sorry if I've disturbed you," he said, his voice calm and kind. "But feeding these birds brings me peace. They too deserve a little kindness." "Kindness?" Sarah scoffed. "Kindness is for fools." She turned away, shaking her head, and muttered under her breath, "Waste of time." As Sarah continued her walk through the park, something strange began to happen. The trees, which had been bathed in the golden light of morning, now seemed to cast long, ominous shadows. The air grew colder, biting at her skin, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring the path ahead. Sarah's pace quickened. She knew this park like the back of her hand, but suddenly, the path seemed to twist and turn in ways she didn't recognize. Every turn she took led her deeper into the fog, and the once familiar landmarks were nowhere to be found. The birds, once peacefully chirping, fell silent. The world around her became unnervingly still. She stopped walking, her heart beginning to pound in her chest. What's going on?" she muttered, her voice wavering slightly. She spun around, but the path behind her had vanished into the mist. Panic set in. A gust of wind swept through the park, whispering her name. "Sarah." She froze. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice echoing back to her in the eerie silence. There was no answer, only the growing sense that she was not alone. The trees seemed to close in on her, their branches gnarled and reaching out like claws. The fog thickened, swirling around her, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Her heart raced as she stumbled forward, desperately searching for a way out. As she moved deeper into the park, strange, shadowy figures began to emerge in the fog. They were faint at first, mere outlines, but they grew more distinct with each step she took. They surrounded her on all sides, silent and unmoving, their faces hidden in the mist. "Sarah!" The whisper came again, this time louder and closer. Her breath caught in her throat as she spun around to face the source of the voice. In front of her stood the old man, but he was different now. His eyes, once warm and kind, glowed with an eerie light. His figure seemed taller, his shadow stretching out far beyond what it should. The birds, once innocent and fluttering, circled ominously above his head, their wings flapping like the sound of thunder in the distance. "You think kindness is a waste of time?" the old man asked, his voice no longer soft and gentle, but low and resonant, as if it came from deep within the earth. "Do you think that being cruel to others makes you strong?" Sarah's legs trembled as she tried to step back, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Her throat tightened, and she could only manage a whisper. What is this?" "This," the old man said, stepping forward, "is a glimpse into the darkness you create when you hurt others without care. Every unkind word, every cruel action, they come back to you, Sarah. They grow in the shadows and twist the world around you." Suddenly, the shadowy figures surrounding her became clearer. They were people she recognized. The clerk from the bakery stood there, her face twisted in sadness from Sarah's earlier outburst. There was the barista she had insulted last week, and the neighbor she had scorned for letting his dog bark. Their faces were filled with the pain she had caused, their eyes cold and accusing. "You've sown seeds of cruelty, and now you must face them," the old man said, his voice echoing through the fog. "Do you feel how cold the world is without kindness? Do you see how alone you are when you push others away?" The shadowy figures moved closer, their eyes locked on Sarah, their expressions full of sorrow. She could feel their pain pressing down on her, suffocating her. The weight of her own cruelty became unbearable. No, I didn't mean to!" Sarah cried, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't realize. I didn't know I was hurting them." "That's the problem," the old man said, his voice softer now. "You never stopped to think. But now you see. Your words have power, Sarah, and they can either hurt or heal. The choice is yours." The fog swirled faster, the shadows circling her tighter, their whispers growing louder. "Sarah, please!" she screamed, covering her ears. "Make it stop! I don't want this! I don't want to hurt anyone anymore!" And just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog lifted, the shadows faded away, and the park returned to its peaceful, sunlit state. Sarah collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, her heart racing. The old man was still there, standing in front of her, but now he looked just as he had before, a gentle, frail figure feeding the pigeons. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "Remember this feeling," he said softly. "Remember how it feels to be lost in the darkness of cruelty. But also remember that you have the power to bring light into the world through kindness." Sarah, shaken to her core, nodded. She had never been so terrified in her life, but more than the fear, it was the overwhelming realization of the pain she had caused that lingered. She knew now that her words had consequences, and that being inconsiderate was not just harmless bluntness. It was a kind of darkness that spread to others. With trembling hands, she stood up and looked around. The park was serene once more, the birds chirping and the leaves rustling in the breeze. She took a deep breath, the weight of the lesson sinking in. From that day on, Sarah vowed to be different. She couldn't change the past, but she could choose to be kinder moving forward. And though it wasn't easy, she found that with each smile and each kind word, the world around her became a little brighter, and the darkness that had once surrounded her began to fade. Please subscribe to the channel for more stories.